Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could change the football landscape in the very near future. So today, usually what we would do here is thoughts, but since I'm only going to release one episode for this week, it's Thanksgiving week, you got to cut me a little bit of slack there, but I'm just going to release one episode, and I thought about doing predictions, but I feel like you can hear a lot about the games that are unfolding just about anywhere else that does college football podcasts. I think that topic is going to be well covered this week, especially with some of the more notable games that we would have talked about. So I decided to take a different route. One of the biggest stories in college football right now is if Lane Kiffin is truly about to take the Auburn job. So I want to look at my top 5 coaches that could be flight risks and put them on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being I don't expect them to leave at all, 5 being their bags are already packed and they're ready to rock. So we're going to go through that. Plus, I want to look at 5 other head coaching jobs that I think will come open due to coaches being fired. So it's a little bit separate. I can't really reuse some of these other coaches because if they're going to get another high-profile job, they're not getting fired from their last one. So that's going to be our focus for today. And as you can see behind me, we are on episode 50 of this podcast. So I'll explain to you what that means and what we're going to do to celebrate that at the end of this episode. So if you're interested in that, make sure to stick around. But before we get into any of that, I want to go ahead and make sure that you hit like, that you hit subscribe, because we've been doing 50 of these things and I'm trying to get that growth on the channel more and more and more. If you guys can help me out with that, it'd be pretty awesome. So obviously the big coach, like I just mentioned off the very top, Lane Kiffin is the name to know. It seems like kind of a 50-50 split right now as to whether or not he's going to leave or if he's going to stick around or what the situation is. I personally have it at a 2.5 out of 5. I know it doesn't help you any if you came here for a solidified, is he going or is he not? But the problem is that Lane Kiffin is his own thing. He's an anomaly. He is just such a different beast to just about any other coach in college football. So I can't pretend to know what he's thinking. I know that the report came out, the reporter had claimed that he was about ready to head to Auburn and take over that job, and he's been going back and forth with him, and they're trading blows, and Lane seems very adamant that he is staying, which could just be a sign to try to help his players be really into the Egg Bowl this weekend. But my big issue with this is that the Auburn job, while yes, it is more lucrative than Ole Miss, I want to take a step back and look at it from a 5 years perspective. Put yourself in Lane Kiffin's shoes in 5 years. Nick Saban's gone, or he just steps down. Let's say he's got 5 more years left in the tank, and I know that's an impossible thing to try to project and predict from Saban, but let's say 5 years is whenever he leaves. Lane's sitting there, and you've either got the option of going to Auburn and having what is a 5-year head start if you can stick the landing. You might not still be at Auburn by the time that ends. Do you think what you can build at Auburn is at the same level as what Alabama and the infrastructure that they have built will already be able to give you? Because I've said it multiple times on this podcast, I think he's a shoo-in to take that job when Saban steps down. I think Saban will fight tooth and nail to get Lane Kiffin that position to where you don't have to worry about the flight risk coming up with Lane Kiffin rather, because he's there for the long haul. That's where I'm at personally with Lane. I think that he would stay and take that job. And I think it makes more sense to just take over that infrastructure and then bring your transfer portal abilities and your recruiting abilities into Tuscaloosa, as opposed to trying to out-recruit Nick Saban in his own state, which is going to be a losing battle for as long as he's there. Again, I cannot pretend to know what Lane Kiffin thinks. He is the most wild card of wild cards in college football. He is a man that no one quite understands except for Lane Kiffin or Nick Saban apparently, and he's just such a different human. Like, he's so hard to predict. So I have to go with 2.5 out of 5 here, because there's really no telling what he's going to do. There's no clue what he's thinking, because we've seen him jump ship before, namely at that Tennessee job, but we've also seen him grow a lot since he did that. So I think that there should be a little bit of hope in Oxford that he'll stick around. So obviously kind of in the fence with Lane Kiffin as to where I think he'll go or if he will go. I'm pretty determined and set in stone that Hugh Freeze, currently coaching at Liberty, he's gone this year. I think that he takes the jump to a Power 5 school, to maybe not the SEC, because I don't know that Auburn would take him if Lane doesn't come. It's kind of a shaky ground there. I kind of thought Kentucky could be in play before Mark Stoops got that extension. I thought Stoops was probably ready to leave and go find his new job. But I do think Hugh Freeze is done at Liberty, and this season will be more about where does he go next as opposed to does he go anywhere next. I was pretty shocked whenever he returned to be the head coach at Liberty for this season. With Malik Willis going to the NFL, that seemed like a pretty clear-cut point of departure for Hugh Freeze. That was very strange to me, and I don't know maybe if the offers weren't on the table, but they sure will be this year because he continues to win even without a quarterback who was, super electric. He finds ways to win. He gets good kids in the building, and I think that that'll be a pretty easy transfer over to wherever he goes next. He's done an incredible job at Liberty, like I was saying, and folks don't really care about controversy if you win. Urban Meyer's name keeps coming up. Bobby Petrino kept getting jobs. Like, if you can prove that you're a very good head coach, they don't really care that you're not the most stable human being or you're not the most trustable human being, especially if they feel like their job is really big, because then you don't really have to worry about other fish trying to pull you away. I think a return to the SEC is possible, like I was saying. The real jobs I would look at here, there's the Nebraska job, and then there's a couple of these other ones that I think could open up due to firings that could sway Hugh Freeze away from Liberty. That could be really interesting as we get closer to it because, while it might not be the biggest job, I think getting back into the Power 5 is the big step for him right now. I don't think he has to go take an Auburn or a Florida or a A&M or if they open up, or you know what I mean? Like, if he can just get back into the Power 5 and even really one or two really good years, solidifying yourself as like a true guy still and willing to compete and able to compete on that level, I think he'll get another huge job after that. It's just about getting back into that level that he has to worry about. Okay, so throughout this year, Lance Leipold from Kansas was one of the most talked about candidates to be the next big head coach at Nebraska, or I don't know that his name ever came up for the Auburn job, but like all these other openings, they're like Lance Leipold. Colorado was an option. Maybe you look at Arizona State or maybe some of those other jobs opening up that could have been interested in him. As the years gone on, his number of flight risk has dropped drastically for me. I've got him currently at a 2 out of 5 for leaving Kansas. I think he sticks around for one more year, but it's not impossible that he leaves. So ever since that TCU game, so October 9th, that number has continued to drop. They've gone 1-5, starting with that TCU game, with a minus 64 points differential. They've been outscored by 64 points across those 6 weeks, which is very not good. That's something to be worried about. And while obviously it's Kansas, he probably shouldn't have ever gotten off to that hot of a start to begin with. You can't really feel great about being like, yeah, let's go ahead and get this guy whenever the back half of his season has looked like the old Kansas relative to what he had at the very front of the year. I don't think he's going to draw the same big fish that it looked like he would at one point, talking about those Nebraskas and those Colorados. And I think maybe his perception of his own value has kind of gotten him out of this position, where I don't know that if, I don't know, random school, Arizona State, let's say Arizona State calls him. I don't know that Arizona State's a big enough job for him relative to what he thought he could get earlier. But, it would be pretty in line and it would be a better move for him. I just don't think that he would do it at this point. Could it happen? Sure. If there's a bunch of money on the table, it's always going to be hard to say no when you're a head coach. I just think that if he can have another solid showing and maybe one that has a little bit more consistency running through it, then we worry about it next year. But for this year, I'm not just totally sold that the match is going to be there, that the right fit is going to fall in place here for Lance Leipold. So the next coach I want to talk about, a job that I think he's probably hit the ceiling on, PJ Fleck at Minnesota. I think that he has achieved what he can at Minnesota, so I do have him at a 3 out of 5 as a closer to likely than not likely, but still pretty in the middle there. I think that if a good job like Nebraska slides a contract across his table, he takes that job. I think that he realizes that where he's at currently in his career, he cannot do anything else with this program. He's hit this really high floor for the Golden Gophers. Year after year, they continuously win jobs. And, I don't even know that it boils down as a flight risk for him. Again, huge money, guarantees, year guarantees would be a big thing for PJ Fleck, I think. If he can get a big job to say, we'll give you a guaranteed 4 years of service where we cannot buy you out, I think that could maybe get it done, because I do think it's going to take him a minute to build something up, and I don't even think that's a bad idea for your Nebraskas or your Colorados, where you're in such a bad shape right now. Giving somebody some stability and really giving them time to work and figure things out, I think could end up securing them a larger fish than maybe they can without having that type of guarantee in there. He's shown a really strong ability to pick up a lot of wins on a yearly basis. He stabilized that program, and he achieves nearly the maximum amount of success just about every year that he can at Minnesota. There's a much higher base at Nebraska. Nebraska is the job I want to focus in on with him. He can compete in the Big Ten. We're seeing it. We are consistently seeing him go toe-to-toe and win a lot of important games in the Big Ten. It comes down to cost, and that's the only way I see Nebraska pulling him away from this job. Just so happens Nebraska's got a lot of money to throw around, and they need to be good again. Within their walls, I think they're sick and tired, as any quality athletics program should be. They're sick and tired of being bad. They're sick and tired of that Scott Frost experiment and what they had to watch there. And Mickey Joseph, despite the fact that he started off hot, it's starting to trend downwards again. And while Mickey Joseph, I remember him landing some pretty big recruits for Nebraska, so that could hinder that a little bit. But I think you have to look long-term over short-term, and I think PJ Fleck could be the right guy to help them out. And then lastly, I wanted to save him for last because he's not a D1 coach. So that kind of helped me filter him down to the bottom. But, Deion Sanders is a name that is constantly mentioned year after year, since he's been a head coach, or even before whenever he was being in talks with, Florida State and these other programs about potentially starting his head coaching career there. He's now gotten his start at Jackson State. I've got him as a 1.5 out of 5, so I don't feel particularly strong that he's going to leave at all, because, as you heard me a little bit earlier, I really like a natural conclusion. With Hugh Freeze, I saw a natural conclusion when Malik Willis left. Deion's has an even more definitive line, because Shader Sanders, his son, the quarterback of Jackson State, he could go to the league, and I think probably should after next season. He's currently a sophomore. He'll be a junior next year. He can go pro after that. So what's more of a definitive break than letting your kid, walk to the pros and then saying, all right, I did my job here. Let's take Travis Hunter. Let's take any of these other kids that I think that can play D1 ball, and let's move it to a new program. Because when you think about it, Deion really has an ace in the hole as soon as he gets a new job. Travis Hunter is a superstar, and he can immediately bring that kid in like he's a part of his signing class with 2 years of collegiate experience. That's giant. You're not just bringing Deion Sanders in, and yeah, I know one player doesn't really change everything all that much, but a player of Travis Hunter's caliber is giant for any program. And while, I could see it happening if, like, one of these bigger jobs that we're not expecting opens up, pulls it, like, if Florida State for some reason loses their head coach and they call Deion up, I think it happens. But, I don't know that any of the jobs that we're currently seeing in this cycle right now feel particularly good. And with there not being a natural conclusion yet, with the fact that you would have to uproot Travis Hunter after 1 year of playing, and then Shader, 1 year away from going pro, it feels a little weird right now. I think he's got one more year left in him before he makes a jump up to a Power 5, so I'm going to wait and be patient on him for right now. I think he holds all the cards. I don't know that he'll be really excited or enticed by any of the jobs, and I think he knows he can pull a bigger fish than what we're talking about here. I see that Colorado is kind of the buzz team right now that's around him. I think he knows that he can be better than what Colorado offers right now. Maybe not financially, but as far as a starting point and some real stability and some real reliability behind him, I think he knows he can get a better spot than that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the top 5 jobs that I see opening due to head coach firing. Now, the first one feels pretty obvious to me, despite the fact that he's been there for forever at this point. Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern, I do expect him to move on because Northwestern just continuously struggles to succeed, and a lot of that is placed solely on the university. There's a really high bar to get into that school. And Pat Fitzgerald has a really tough time recruiting kids that are on that level to go to Northwestern academically that don't go to Notre Dame or to your Stanfords or to, like these super highly ranked schools within the education system that also have a really good football program. So I don't know that Northwestern really ever had a shot with Pat Fitzgerald because it takes a superstar type of coach to really make those environments work. And I think they're going to try to make a superstar something that Pat Fitzgerald has not really turned into. It's 3 really bad years in the past 4 seasons for Pat, so I think that should be enough to send him packing. Unless, they put out some feelers and don't really see anybody else coming back and say, you know what, Pat's probably our best option. That's entirely possible. It's hard to win at a school like Northwestern, so you have to be cognizant of that. I don't really know what candidates would be interested. I do think Fitzgerald lands on his feet and does really well at his next job, but I do think it would be a good idea for both of them right now to kind of branch off and either Northwestern really commit to a different style. It's kind of like Vanderbilt in the SEC where it's very clearly there's a lot of hurdles to jump over to get there, and even when you get there, you're not really in the best place in the world. So a lot of kids kind of understandably can avoid that. So I'm curious to see. That is the number one job, though, that I do believe will come open. The next one I've got, funny enough, I just mentioned them in that last one. I've got Stanford coming open because David Shaw has had a really rough go of things here recently. It's been pretty rough since McCaffrey left Stanford, that they've gradually gone downhill, and now David Shaw was kind of on the hot seat coming into the year. I think he should probably be out at this point, and I don't know how he lands once he departs the Pac-12. He hasn't won more than 4 games in his last 4 attempts. That's very clearly not good enough. Stanford should be a pretty easy spot to land a good coach, though. I mean, you've got a good coaching lineage. You've got great weather. You've got a decent amount of NFL guys. It's easier to recruit a kid to Stanford because of where you're located than it is Northwestern, even though, they're kind of in that same grouping of educational schools. Like, it's a high bar to get into Stanford, but look where you're at. It's pretty self-explanatory why kids would want to go to that university. Another underrated thing as to why I think Stanford's a good job is because they'll be able to give the next head coach a lot of time. It took them 4 years of bad results, potentially, maybe even 5 if they keep Shaw, before they fired him. So that's an easy pitch to make, and I think something that could draw a larger fish, kind of like what I was saying with the year's guarantee, looking at the patience that they've shown and looking at their ability to kind of hang in there and be like, look, we're going to give you the time you need. We're going to let things kind of happen as they need to. I think that could end up pulling somebody pretty interesting into the doors and maybe even starting a bit of a turnaround for Stanford. Who knows? Okay, so Stanford, I don't remember if I got to talk about them much. I remember talking about it at the beginning of the year, but I did one of these kind of in the middle of the season where I was kind of doing a hot seat tracker. I remember talking about Stanford at the beginning of the year, but I don't remember if they fell in here. I know that West Virginia has been a fixture throughout the season, and that has not changed to this point. I think the Neil Brown experiment and the situation there is over. I think there's a lot of not really turmoil, but there's a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of questions within that program. And with the Big 12 set to expand a pretty vast amount, I think that you're going to be expecting a new head coach for the Mountaineers to come in this season. This is going to be one of the more challenging jobs, I think, for anybody that takes over this season, because you are getting BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston coming into the Big 12. So you've got 4 new challengers. Well, granted, OU and Texas will leave soon, but you've got 4 new teams that you'll have to worry about recruiting against. Plus, it's not like this situation is really going to be left in a great spot. You don't really get to come in with a lot of success, and I think that a lot of the questions are who stays with the program and who, if they do stay, do you trust to be a starter out there, which I think that number drops weekly on how many players you genuinely think are impact level players at a program like West Virginia. Neil Brown can't get to bowl eligibility, and he's only had a positive record once in 4 seasons. I know that maybe 4 years isn't really enough to gauge a head coach, but whenever it's gone the way that it has, I think it's pretty safe to go ahead and move on. I think West Virginia is going to be one of those teams that is very aware that they have to make a big move because of the shifts coming to the conference. I think that happens now. They go ahead and offload Neil Brown, find somebody else that they think could do this job and do it well, and try to, reload and gradually build that program up over the next couple of years, as opposed to really keeping themselves tied down with who's currently in the building. So a lot of these have been based on coach performance. And while this next one obviously does have a bit of that factor to it, there's another big thing at play for why I believe this job will open up. Tom Allen in Indiana, I do believe that he will be gone from the Hoosiers this year. And while his record has not been pretty, I think it's actually the performance of Michael Penix Jr. out in Washington that could be the final nail in the coffin here and send his coach, his old coach, I guess, out and looking for a new job. Michael Penix Jr. this season, if you haven't been watching Pac-12 football, he's been having an incredible year. I mean, dude is putting up insane numbers on a weekly basis. And, obviously he used to be the quarterback in Bloomington. He used to be the guy under center. And then obviously he entered the transfer portal, and now he's doing what he's doing. It's been incredible. So you have to look back as an AD or as a booster or as a whatever and be like, well, why didn't we get that? What is our problem? And obviously that defaults to coaching. Could he fire a coordinator and maybe save face and save his job? Possibly. But until that happens, I'm under the impression that he's the one that will be on the rocks and the one that is at fear or, at risk of losing his job. I could see him getting one more year, but in the Big Ten, especially if Northwestern opens up, if Minnesota opens up because PJ Fleck goes to Nebraska, I think that maybe you get cold feet and you realize, okay, we can't just sit here. We've got to go, and you go ahead and pull the plug on it and go ahead and move somebody else in. So the last team I want to talk about resides in the ACC. This is probably the one that I believe is farthest away from happening, but I do think Boston College is a potential job that opens up because the Jeff Hafley experiment, or more realistically, the Phil Dracovic experience, has not gone how they want it to, and their numbers just continuously drop and drop as Hafley has been at the helm. It's not been just a great year or a great run for Hafley. Like I said, every year's been a drop in production, and it's going to end as a 3 or 4 win season this year. And that's obviously going to be the low mark for him. There's been no sign of improvement or production. You waited on a quarterback that hasn't really been what we thought he was, and he kept getting hurt, and you never really put anybody in there as a potential fill-in or somebody who could step up into that role if need be. So you have to be worried about that as well, that overcommitment to, and what really ended up being tanking your team and your season. Like, you've had some really good players out there, but you haven't really shown that you're willing to use them and, move past stuff and admit that you're wrong in certain situations to get to that level of success that you need to, which is never a good sign. This is, again, the biggest stretch to me because it's still early in his tenure. He's been there 3 years, but the BC job could absolutely come open. I think with how vulnerable the ACC has looked this year, trying to get a foothold on that and trying to move up would be a pretty smart idea for Boston College. So, let me know what you think. Is there any other head coaches you want to hear what I think about them, or anybody fits? For those 5 coaching jobs I just listed that I think they'll fire their head coach, who would you like to see at those programs? Where would you like to see the head coaches that I listed at the top where I think they could be flight risks? Where would you like them to go? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. But before we go, as I mentioned earlier, episode 50. This is episode 50. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do another live episode, or not really live, but a full episode of this. My next episode that I will release will be number 51, and it's going to be 50 takes from 50 videos. The first 50 videos, obviously, from this episode. And so those will be, some of my worst takes, some of my best takes, some of just the most outlandish ones, just trying to find kind of the highlights in a sense through these first 50 episodes. So make sure to check that out. It won't be a predictions video. It won't be anything like that, but it will be a nice little recap if you're either new to the channel or have been here for a while to kind of stroll down memory lane and see what you think. So for now, that is, episode 50 of the From My Perspective podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.